Hello, school transportation nation. Happy New Year. We made it 2023. 2022 is in the books. And like many episodes before, this one is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. And we have a special guest, Chris Walls from Kansas City Public Schools in Missouri, joining us a little later. Mr. Ryan Gray is going to be talking to him. But before that, Ryan and I are going to be talking. Ryan, Happy New Year to you, sir.
Happy New Year, Tony. Hope you and the family had a great holiday, some rest and relaxation.
Absolutely. It's always good to have family time, but you kind of got to shake the dust off, get back in the swing of things. I know school has been out last week for our kids, and they're just starting up here the week of the 9th. So exciting to get them back in school because you got to keep kids engaged. And, you know, when they're home, they're tearing up your house. So you got to get them out. I'm sure all the parents feel that way.
Exactly. Yeah. My daughter went back last week. She's back in the swing of things. I think this week they're already doing their progress report testing. So, it's good to have those kids back at school and, of course, in school buses nationwide.
Absolutely. Other things we got happening. I know we dropped our brand new January 2023 issue and our also brand new 2023 buyer's guide with all the great data statistics on all the manufacturing, kind of a bellwether of industry health and wellness. And Ryan, you want to give us a little kind of breakdown of kind of what you saw? What were your opinions of some of the manufacturing data, maybe some of the economic headwinds, inflationary headwinds? We're seeing some of those things maybe landing on school bus a little bit, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. The economic landscape right now, it seems to be, chugging along. There was a favorable jobs report that came out from December, 223,000 jobs, I believe, added. But still, there's a lot of anxiety out there. I think, some folks still think that we are either in a recession or heading to one. I know that, your article, Tony, you always in the buyer's guide look at your crystal ball, and you're looking at the stock market and at different economic indicators and reports and commentary. Obviously, this past year, the housing market was really kind of all over the place, as was the stock market. Now, obviously, those are not, indicators directly on the health of the economy, but it does give, as you mentioned, that bellwether. So with schools and school transportation reliant so much on local control, property taxes, we're always looking at that. But in terms of manufacturing, we did see, minimal gains over last year. And I think it would have been better, except for those supply chain that we talked about so much over the past year and a half, really. And the indications are that we're kind of in for the same throughout this year. I think the general consensus from the manufacturers is, I think, some healthy yet conservative optimism. They're looking at some growth because, especially when you're looking at the Clean School Bus program, year 2 is going to be dropping now. The funds from the year 1 rebate have now, have made their way to schools or are making their way to schools, all the winners now. But we see that there is still that healthy appetite for buying out there, whether we're talking about electric buses, alternative fuel buses, namely propane, or diesel and gasoline. Amid all of these pressures, we know that EPA recently released its final rule on the 2027 NOx emissions, their Clean Trucks plan, and that affects school buses. I mean, it's looking at heavy duty engines, but really across the entire spectrum. Diesel, especially, those emission standards are becoming more and more strict. When you go back to as early as 2007 and then 2010, and every couple of years after that, EPA has been really trying to reduce those emissions from diesel buses, of course, get those older, dirtier diesels off the road. But today's diesel, because of the past decade of all this regulatory work and how it's impacted the manufacturing and the engines, the technology, diesel school buses today are 90% cleaner than they were 10, 15 years ago. Still not clean enough, though, according to a lot of environmental advocates. So, what we're looking at right now is the days of diesel. Are they numbered? So we had, some information, an article up on ST Online about that when the EPA broke their final rule news last month. Really the indication is that, it does seem that diesel's days are numbered. Some of the manufacturers, maybe not publicly, but privately, maybe with select conversations out there are, saying, hey, we're probably not going to be able to continue to make diesel long term. So what does that mean? Right? There's still people buying diesel today. As I was mentioning, there's still this very healthy appetite to buy buses. It's just the manufacturing has not been able, for a myriad reasons, to fulfill. And we're seeing those buying cycles extend. So that's forcing school districts to maintain their buses, keep those buses longer. But again, those buses that they're keeping longer, if they're diesel, they're a lot cleaner today than they were 10, 15 years ago. So those are some of the pressures, nothing earth-shattering or new that I don't think people aren't already aware of. But, certainly you can read more and see some of those numbers when you head over to stonline.com. You can click on our magazine section, go into our digital editions and find the 2023 Buyer's Guide.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, some of the trends I think too is, I spoke to some OEM insiders and they basically had said, look, bottom line, demand is going to outstrip supply. And it's going to be double digit, maybe 20, 30%. And what happens? Prices go up, right? New emission standards, engines are more expensive, right? So does that kind of variance between diesel and alternatives, does that valley shrink a little bit? I'm not sure at the end of the day because costs of batteries are going up for electric. Propane seems to be maybe that'll become the least expensive option. We'll see what happens because those engines, I believe, already meet the 2027 standards. So you don't have to re-engineer the propane engine to do that. Now we know Cummins is coming out with a new propane and gasoline offering in their kind of 2024 portfolio. We may see a little bit of that in late 2023, and they're the leader, obviously, in engine technology. So there's a lot happening in the power space, the energy space, but I'm sure you guys out there in the nation, when your dealer comes to you and says, hey, I have a surcharge of another $5,000 or $10,000 for that bus you ordered times however many buses, now you got to come up with another 10 grand, 20 grand, 100 grand, maybe $1 million. I mean, those are really big increases from a percentage standpoint. And the OEMs cannot keep up with the continuous price increases. They can't just absorb it. They have to pass that along to the end user. And that's a very unusual climate for people to be in. Now, granted, 2022, people felt that. And I'm sure it wasn't a very comfortable conversation to have, but this is the kind of new reality that we're in. And then I was talking to somebody yesterday out in North Carolina, and they were like, hey, our gas prices have gone up by 50 or 60%. If you really look at pre-pandemic levels, the gas prices were up, then they went down, then they're back up again. And prices have been extremely fluctuant. And I know the federal government is trying to tap into the oil reserves, and maybe that reduces it by 10 cents or 20 cents, but it's not sustainable. It's all politics to some degree. But at the end of the day, oil, you look at some of the earnings from the oil companies, they're posting the largest earnings in history. And that is the impact that school transportation is going to feel in their pocketbook. And how do you budget, right? Budgets are set from last July. Now you're trying to move the pieces around the puzzle. With COVID, maybe you had some extra money because you didn't spend it. Now all that kind of games are gone. Now what do you do going into this new kind of budget cycle, into that kind of latter half? So it'll be very interesting to see how the industry reacts to this. And obviously, we've got GM and Ford with the chassis shortages on Type A builders, which there's no end in sight there either. We've seen a few people try to invest in EV solutions, but those chassis are more expensive, right? The cost versus a gas or diesel is more. But, I'm not sure if that's really going to change the landscape of the Type A market going forward, because anybody that was getting an allocation, they're on limited allocation. And it's kind of this unknown. So that trend looks to continue. So lots happening in that environment. We'll keep an eye on it throughout the year and keep you guys informed. I know with our January issue, we recapped the TSD conference, talked about some special needs trends, and then we had that really great evacuation story, Ryan, where there's smoke on the bus, people jumping out of the bus with the kids, and the big title was 120 seconds, right? That doesn't seem like a very long time to get off a bus full of kids and evacuate them in an event of a fire. Kind of scary a little bit, Ryan, when you really kind of paint that picture.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these kind of hands-on training exercises so valuable. And the challenge is, we'd love to provide this to the entire TSD group. But when you're doing these hands-on training exercises, it's a lot of work, and only so many people can go through there. That the whole element there is hands-on. You can't get 450 people hands-on unless you just do this every day, every hour for like 5 days, and that's just not feasible. We are looking to continue to do this at TSD and maybe expand, provide a couple of offerings each year. So stay tuned with that, trying to kind of work out the details. But you're absolutely right. Taylor's article, 120 seconds, 2 minutes. Denny Coughlin, who is one of our trainers and has done a lot of the smoke on the bus and work with fire departments as well as law enforcement over the years, and has done a lot of some of this training at STN Expo Reno. Brought this to the TSD group, and definitely it opened up a lot of eyes. I want to thank our friends at Prosper Independent School District there in the Frisco area. Actually, their facility that they provided to us for both this exercise as well as the rodeo and the NHTSA 8-hour child passenger safety on school buses. This is actually technically in Frisco, but it's Prosper ISD, so they really stepped up, and want to thank them again because Frisco ISD, our normal partner, was unable because of a Veterans Day parade they had that weekend. But again, it was some great training, and stay tuned. We're looking to expand that.
Yeah, some other headlines, Ryan. Obviously, we're feeling it in California. Southern California's got a little bit of rain, but you've got this bomb cyclone hitting San Francisco, affecting operations, affecting everything. You've got, winter weather, hitting the country, affecting things. It feels like we're definitely in winter, Ryan. No joke there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Weather really, weather all across the nation has been, bonkers for a while. And, a lot of folks, I think, are always like, oh, you guys out in California, Crimea River. I was talking to some folks before Christmas, when they were having that huge polar vortex, that Siberian crunch coming down, and, doing sub-freezing temperatures all across most of the nation. I'm talking to Chris Walls in a little bit. He was telling me that it was negative 45 in Kansas City. It gets cold in Kansas City. We know, we've been out there several times for NAPT conferences. It gets cold, but I don't think they were even prepared for negative 45. That's like northern Minnesota, North Dakota type weather, Alaska, Canada, certainly. But yeah, with that bomb cyclone that hit last week, we did get quite a bit of rain down here in Southern California. For us, we desperately need the water, but really Northern and Central California got the brunt of it. And another, more storms are coming in, as we're going to press with this recording, with another storm's lining up for the evening to hit Oregon and Northern California. You're looking at some of the rainfall to date totals in Northern California. South Lake Tahoe was at 219% of normal for this time of year. No one's gone over 100% of normal yet, but South Lake Tahoe's come dang close. I mean, they're already at 90% of their normal rainfall, and it's only, the second week of January. They still have, months left. Now, granted, we know full well here in California that we tend to get a lot of rain at once, and then we don't see it for months. But again, up north, it's a little bit of a different story, different climate. And with that rain all at once comes flooding. And there's just some, horrible flooding up there right now. San Francisco area, throughout the northern part of the state, the central valleys. No relief in sight yet. More storms coming. I think it was very opportune when we put up an article late last month on flooding. And certainly we've been talking editorially about, the need to really discuss flooding in our articles and at our conferences. We're seeing that flooding just all over the place, all over the map, literally. We've had the issues with, of course, the Mississippi River. That happens. They get a lot of, when they get their heavy rains, that, breaches the banks. And they get a lot of flooding out there, down south, back east. So, we've had tornadoes, Tony, down in Georgia. We've had, huge snowstorms in Colorado. And Colorado's used to a lot of snow. The Rockies just getting really packed with powder right now. So it's great for the skiers in a few weeks. So if you guys are heading out to a little post-holiday vacation, that might be in order. But as of right now, it just, the weather is just so unstable. And obviously, we're looking at how is it impacting school transportation. A lot of the schools are still in session. So, we invite you to email us. Email me, Ryan, at stnonline.com. Let me know how your operations have been faring. If you have, we love photos, send me your photos. And you can check out the article that we were referencing on that bomb cyclone at stnonline.com. I posted that on January 4th, so you can check that out.
Yeah, also a shout out for some of the special reports up on the stnonline.com website as well. We had a recap of that special needs story where we had that special needs student attacked. You guys kind of broke that down, got some industry reaction. We also had some spending bills come out, approval. I think you had a story on the chips. Was it chips bill, Ryan? Was that the deal on that?
It was looking at the U.S. chip shortage, and could it worsen? Speaking of that legislation, we had that CHIPS Act that was passed last year, that Chips and Science Act that's looking to basically get the U.S. caught up, mainly with China, on technology. Everyone knows about the chip shortage, that we had in the automotive sector and continue to have. You can head over to our special report section and read kind of about some of those pressures and the impact, some interesting studies, of course, and then, looking at what the Biden administration is trying to do to address that. But speaking of that chip shortage, that funding element, a big part of that is wrapped up in the omnibus bill. So that was passed late last year, just before Christmas. So funding the federal government, that's another conversation that we always seem to be seeing in the national press over the last several years, where Congress just can't get their acting together and get the fiscal year budgets passed in time. So they did avert any government shutdown or anything by getting that passed late last year. And, again, they're addressing that CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, $1.8 billion in new funding. And so, certainly looking to see how the manufacturing sector can get a boost from that to make sure that they can, get that R&D where it needs to be and get caught up. Because, everything, whether we're looking at electric vehicles, the chip manufacturing that goes into so many things, not just the automotive vehicles, the school buses, but tablets, for example. I was talking to a bunch of folks at TSD. I think I mentioned this previously, and was hearing that some of the tablet manufacturers, because they couldn't get a chip, they had to go to another provider, and it was a different chip, and that actually, affected the algorithms with the routing software and the student ridership, and so there had to be on the fly updates made, and that actually, some folks for a while saw some interruption in service or some wonky things happening with their software and hardware, on their school buses. So, it's just this domino effect that we're seeing right now. It just, there's this cause and effect to everything. So, certainly keeping an eye on that. And again, if you guys out there in School Transportation Nation have stories that you want to share about how the chip shortages have affected you, whether it be in your vehicles or in your technology, please let us know.
Excellent. All right, Ryan, before we go to our guests, there's one other topic we want to talk about. It's the rise in student discipline issues on the bus. It's a big issue. We see reports of incidents. You don't want them to fall through the cracks. And TransFinder has taken a special interest in this particular topic. And they've created Form Finder, which makes recording these incidents easy and easier to follow up on, and it can be used district-wide. So when a child is having issues on a bus or the classroom, key stakeholders can be kept in the loop. The goal is to keep kids safe as possible and addressing the problem as early as possible. Guys, Form Finder is embedded in TransFinder's Route Finder Plus solution. It's included free of charge. Its use goes beyond student conduct, but can be customized for any form for your district's needs. Imagine one clearinghouse for all your district forms. You can learn more by emailing getplus@transfinder.com or give them a call at 800-373-3609. Be sure to mention want to know more about Form Finder. All right, Ryan, take it away. Chris Walls, excited for that conversation.
Want to welcome our guest this week, Chris Walls, Director of Transportation for Kansas City Public Schools in Missouri. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. I was commenting to Chris before we started recording. It's been here. We have the benefit of seeing each other on video. Of course, all you out there in School Transportation Nation are hearing our lovely voices. But I was commenting to Chris that since I've last seen him, have been several years now. Before he started at Kansas City, he's sporting a beard. So I think you were mentioning that COVID. That's a COVID holdover, is it, Chris?
It is, yeah. It's been kind of a fun new feature to add, for a new season of transportation.
Absolutely. It probably keeps you warm, too. I imagine, along with the rest of the country, Kansas City has gotten some pretty frigid temperatures. We had that big polar vortex or whatever that thing was, came down from Siberia.
Yeah, negative 45-degree wind chills here in Kansas City during that time.
Ooh, and you guys were up and running during that time.
We had a few things running. We had about 30 trips running over the holiday break. So those propane buses were definitely tested for sure.
Wow. Yeah. How do you keep those warm? I mean, I just can't fathom being here from Southern California, negative 45-degree weather and in a school bus riding down the road. I just can't. I can't wrap my head around.
The key is trying your best to keep that engine block warm if possible. So you're starting them and letting them run and idle for a little while to stay warm, and then shutting them back down. And what is your timing to not be wasteful, but to make sure that you maintain that engine heat so that the vehicle will turn over and start again.
Yeah, boy. Well, we'll definitely talk more propane in a few minutes. But first, I think it's a great opportunity for those out there in the nation who don't know who Chris Walls is. Give us your background. How did you get started in the industry?
Yeah, so I joined the military out of high school and then lucked into the field of transportation, right? So worked my way up in transportation through transportation management on the enlisted side, and then became an officer in transportation, and kind of enjoyed that career side. Worked on the heavy truck side and flatbeds and Connex trailers and things like that. Really enjoyed the safety aspect and organizing and routing where our vehicles would go and transport. I just really kind of spent my time learning as much as I could about DOT and how that related to the military side of the house and military driver's license and things like that. And so spent my time with the 101st Airborne primarily, and then spent some time in Fort Carson, Colorado as well, and then some time overseas, 2 tours overseas. And then when it was time to transition out, when I looked at my resume that I'd built in the military, was really primarily in transportation. It's just what it was. So I saw a job opening when I first was ready to exit the military in transportation as director of transportation for Indianapolis Public Schools. That's Indiana's largest school district. And I didn't know much about how the two industries related to one another, but I applied anyway. I barely met the criteria, if I'm being completely transparent, to be eligible for that job. Little did I know that although I was probably the least qualified candidate, their previous 2 directors had also spent their careers in the military in transportation prior to me. So I was grateful. I think they saw somebody maybe young enough to spend some time with them and grow with them, but also probably somebody that was willing to go through some of those hard things that we go through in our industry. So got the job with Indianapolis Public Schools. Was very fortunate. It was my first really big break into the civilian side. That was in 2009. And I spent several years there learning and asking Mike LaRocco, who's the state transportation director in Indiana, way more questions than he cared to have sent to him, right? I'm sure Mike was like, Chris, will you please stop sending questions to me? But I needed to learn, and he seemed to be the knowledge source to go to. So was really grateful to have somebody, and Mike was local to me. Mike was in Indianapolis. I was in Indianapolis. And so I really relied on those around me to learn and asked a ton of questions. I've never yet gotten to the place where I don't ask questions. So transitioned from there into Durham School Services, became a regional manager for Durham School Services, and took over a location that had a few fatalities early on. Right when I first took on those locations, we had 2 fatalities within 2 weeks and almost a third, all within about a 2.5 week stretch of time. And that was 2013. That was really challenging. It was a really challenging year in the business. And I learned a lot about safety through that. I learned a lot about the severity of what we do through some of those experiences. And I learned how to turn a location around, right, working on the contracted side. So spent 3 years there with Durham. We were fortunate to be awarded their most improved location in 2014 as a result of safety improvements and operational improvements. So spent 3 years at Durham, did a lot of travel, got to have a lot of our urban operations. So that's really all I've experienced in this business has been urbans. So Indianapolis, St. Louis, got to help with Memphis, got to help with Philadelphia, San Bernardino. So a lot of travel, a lot of learning, hard environments. I enjoy them. I'm kind of a glutton for punishment in that sense, I think. And then a chance came to come to Kansas City and work with under the STA umbrella and several of their managed services team, right? So Transbar Group, which does some of their contracted work, and then got to work with Jeff Castle at School Bus Safety Company, Ryan, and that's where you and I did some of our work together.
Absolutely, yeah. And
then when Kansas City Public Schools was looking to hire a director themselves, my family had fallen in love with Kansas City. It just felt like home. I don't know if you've ever gone somewhere
yes.
you're not from, but it just it was home when you went there. Well, that was Kansas City for us. So when KCPS said, Chris, will you come back and run our district? That was almost 4 years ago now. I jumped at the opportunity because I like what we do here. I like the vibe in KC, and we've been able to do some neat things here.
Yeah. And so, coming from that contractor background as well, that serves you with KC because Student Transportation of America is your primary contractor. I believe that you also work with a local cab company, and the district has for decades. And then also you have in-house. So kind of what's the, take our listeners through the split in your operations, how much are you doing in-house?
Yeah.
What are you doing in-house and how much is being contracted out?
Yeah. So we take our primary home to school fleet, our large fleet, our big buses. And we contract those out through Student Transportation of America. All of our backup fleet, our spare drivers, anything that we think we're going to need as a supplement, we own as a district 15 of the Type A buses that we have our own drivers for. So they're kind of our backup plan for when days happen where we get negative 45 mile an hour wind gusts, or people want to take a day off because the Chiefs may win the Super Bowl or whatever, right? So they are our backup plan. And then we've got two other contracts. So we've got our local taxi service, as you mentioned, 35 years in business with us, continual. They've got a school cab division with us, actually. So they've got their own branch that is nothing but supporting schools, and we're their primary customer. They do a lot of our McKinney-Vento homeless work. So we've got close to 1,000 students that qualify in our homeless program. So pretty high number, operate close to 100 taxis every day with those guys. And then we also contract with what used to be ALC, right? They're now Ever-Driven, to do some of our high special needs transport. So maybe the students that either have retinal disorders or may need a feeding tube or breathing issues or things like that. So some of our really, really high needs, special needs, we'll transport out and contract out with Ever-Driven, because we're not the medical professionals, right? Our job is to transport. So when our students need that, I want to make sure that they get with the service provider that's able to do those things.
Okay, gotcha. So obviously, so many folks are going to companies like Ever-Driven, or in the past have utilized cab companies. And I know that the big push now is to try to go to the more specialized. And it sounds like with that cab company, that is a specialized service. People think of yellow taxi and they think of just a random yellow taxi showing up. But this is really, like you said, this is geared specifically towards children. And so many of your fellow school districts out there are turning to these services because of the driver shortage. And obviously, Kansas City has not been immune to that. In response to that, you did something pretty innovative and amazing heading into the school year. I mentioned to you earlier, I don't like to use the word backward, but you kind of, flipped routing on its ear. You kind of went opposite of what one would normally do when setting up routes. Can you take us through that?
Sure. Right. So our normal routing model would be, you look at what your student population is, you look at your school boundaries and your different school parameters, and you build your bus route count based on what you believe your need is. Right. So that's been the model that I've experienced since I first came in the business. You figure out what your need is, you build your bus route count to that, and then you staff up to whatever that number is. Right. And it at times can be challenging, but for the most part, you get close to those numbers. So coming out of COVID, we tried to do that. We did that. We were prepared for that. We had our number set. We had polled our drivers to see who we thought was coming back. And we had about 30 drivers less come back than what we had anticipated. So we had to make a quick adjustment on that first year back. And it was for a shortened section of the year. It was only for a few months. So we spent that summer after coming out of COVID really looking at, well, if we have this again, what do we need to do? I don't think the numbers are going to change quick enough for us to go back to the old model. So instead, we brought our drivers back 3 weeks early, made sure that we had physical touch with every single employee that we had. So this wasn't phone calls. This wasn't you sending a letter or an email saying you're going to be back. This was, we want to know who's actually physically here with us, who are qualified drivers. And we took that number, and that's the number that we built the routes that we needed based on. So I knew I had 120 drivers available to us. I may need 150 bus routes, but I'm going to cram 150 bus routes worth of routing into 120 bus drivers. So that looks, a little different than what the model was before, which is you're going to build in some padding and cushion in case a route runs a little late. You're going to understaff a bus so that we can keep students nice and comfortable and separated. We lost some of those abilities, right? So my decisions were, would I rather run a bus route and a bus get to school 5 minutes late, or not be able to run that bus route at all? So that's some of what we had to do. And it took some of those routing models that are designed to optimize, right, in some of your routing systems. And we said, where this doesn't look like it should fit, we're going to force fit it in anyway and see what adjustments can we make to where it can fit. So either moving some students from one route to another or adjusting bell times slightly so that we can make things fit. And then active communication with our schools, right? So that's been the key, is making sure that our families and our schools are aware that we're not immune to a driver shortage. We don't have some secret plan or secret sauce here in Kansas City that works better than elsewhere. Just the reality is, guys, it's a tough environment. We're going to make sure we've got enough drivers to cover the routes we've got, but every bus route is going to be full and optimized. And if there's any hiccups, a bus is probably going to be a few minutes late to school, but we're still going to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's what we've gone with this year. And I've started to poll some of my colleagues in the area, and they're starting to go to a similar sort of setup, because I don't foresee this ending in 12 months. I think we're going to have this situation be similar to this for probably a few more years, would be my guess.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about the importance of that communication, because you mentioned, in the article that Taylor Ekbatani wrote recently, and you can all check that out at stnonline.com. And if you even go to the search and you just search Christopher Wall's name, that's Walls, you'll find that article. But you mentioned that the sometimes these buses are running 5 minutes late, and we recently, before the holidays, ran an article about late buses, and specifically, some of the problems that New York City has had. And this goes again beyond before COVID. You talked about the importance of that communication with your schools and of course your families, but in terms of late buses and truancy, being that you're within the school district, is it just a matter of getting the superintendents, the school principals to understand and do? I don't want to say look the other way when buses are late, because that does impact obviously the student days. But, what's that work look like from someone like yourself? And I've heard, a lot of directors are out there visiting schools much of the week to communicate these things.
Yeah, we've got a great communications department here, weekly updates with my leadership team as well. So it's kind of you attack that animal from several different angles, right? So we've got the mass communication that goes out from our communications team to families about delays on any given day, depending on if we're going to have, or we anticipate a higher than normal call-off rate for our bus drivers, or if we've got a inclement weather situation, or like I said, I'm going to put that plug out there one more time. Maybe the Chiefs will win the Super Bowl again. And, our communications team will send that out to not just the schools, but to the families as well. And then within our leadership, kind of that top-down communication of me being able to share with the superintendent level that, look, this is a human capital problem. This isn't an operational issue where people aren't performing. We've got a finite number of people available for us. So we're trying to maximize everything we can with that. So making sure that they understand what the situation is so they can communicate with their principals and their schools, and the schools can communicate with their families, has been really helpful, right? So we're engaging at the school level, because while I get the privilege of transporting 15,000 kids every day, I don't get to see all of those students, but the school officials do. So making sure that they're able to communicate that out to their families has been really helpful. And for the most part, we've had great success with our principals. They all are understanding when we got late vehicles, and at the end of the day, depending on your school district and your state, Kansas City is in Missouri is a minute for minute attendance. So it's not a block schedule. So if you've got 300 minutes in a day and you miss 4 minutes of it, you attended 294 minutes of that day, right? So your attendance rate for that day is still very, very high. So the idea is we're going to get you there. We're going to get you fed. We're going to get you taken care of. But it just may be a little delayed from time to time.
Okay. And how does technology play into this? One of the things that we've been tracking here at STN is the high implementation and interest in student ridership. Is this something that you guys have now, or maybe perhaps something you're looking to use with STA or with your in-house services?
Yeah, so the tap on, tap off technology, the ridership count, the automated ridership count is key. We use that now. It's something that I think that we will continue to use in whomever our service provider is. It's really critical for us to identify who our students are that are, Medicaid eligible students, who are homeless students, who are special education students. We can isolate out which students ride and what services they're provided. So we do that today. And the secondary piece is making sure you've got a consistent functioning bus tracking app so that when a bus is delayed, which occurs for us probably, out of 350 runs we do a day, it probably happens 15 times a day where there's a bus that's delayed 5, 10, 15 minutes. And as long as a family is aware, they're not sitting out at the street corner waiting on that bus. They know they've got a few more minutes available, and they're not, again, not ideal, but I don't have to be concerned that it's a danger or a safety issue because you're out in the cold or you're out on the street corner or you're in an area you don't need to be longer than you need to be.
You need to give me an app if it's negative 45 degrees, Chris. I'm not, I'm not going to be, I don't even know if I'm going to get out of bed that day, but
Yeah,
so I want to come back to propane, mention that up top, a good segue there with the negative 45. Kansas City, belated congratulations. I congratulated you at the time, but for the public consumption for winning the Green Bus Summit Fleet Award for your propane adoption at the STN Expo Reno Green Bus Summit last July. Seems like, years ago. I look up, it was almost half a year ago. So, a lot of that has been your partnership with STA, right? STA was one of the early adopters of propane, especially at the contractor level. Tell us about your propane fleet. Are you all propane? How many buses? How long now? Why go propane versus maybe some of the other alternatives that were available at the time?
Yeah, great question. So when we bid this contract back in 2019, when we did this, we allowed contractors to bid multiple sources, but we really wanted our focus to be on alternative fuel source, right? So diesel and diesel exhaust fluid and just everything that goes along with that. We wanted to see what our options were. As we looked at some of the other compressed natural gas or electricity, for us in our area with the accessibility to propane seemed like a good potential fit. And, propane buses do come at a premium over a diesel bus. So we're going to pay more for it. And we understood that going into it. Our current makeup with the way that we opted to go when we selected STA as our provider, 155 of our buses, which is all of our large fleet, are all propane powered. So every single one of them are propane. And then we've got 20 small buses that handle really our early childhood special education or special education. And those, because they're required to have air conditioning, those are gasoline powered, which right now with the way diesel costs are, I'm glad that we went with gasoline instead of diesel on those. Those don't run that much. They're really isolated for specialized care. But our entire large fleet is propane. So, we've really had some good success. Our families like the propane. Our drivers love the propane. They heat up a lot quicker. They've got a much lower compression point than diesel does, so they start up faster and they warm up quicker.
Absolutely. And now what about moving forward? Are you committed to sticking with propane? I mean, you mentioned at the time electricity didn't really make sense, but we have this unprecedented amount of money from the feds with the Clean School Bus program at EPA. And, much of that money hinges upon disadvantaged areas, low income, rural, Native American, tribal government land. What's KC looking at as it kind of looks at the great expanse before it? Does it want to stay propane? Are you going to try to test the waters with electric if you get the money?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we'll probably work towards electric. I think our mid-range goal would probably be to maybe transition the gasoline-powered fleet, that small fleet, into electrification, and then start to work on that infrastructure piece, see what that cost comparison looks like, see how that's working. An electrified bus operates quite a bit differently than a propane-powered bus or gas or diesel-powered bus. And Ryan, fortunately, I've had the experience in some of my previous roles with School Bus Safety Company to help establish some of the safe driving procedures for electric buses out in the state of California. Jeff Castle and I got the privilege of going out and spending some time and developing some of those programs around regenerative braking and some of those components to the recharge. And so I feel a little bit maybe better prepared than some would be when we do look at that path. But I think we'll do this in a phased process. I think even just the infrastructure piece alone takes time. It doesn't just take the money, but when we do things here, I want to make sure we do them educated, we do them as cost effective as possible, and that at the end of the day, the product is a good product.
Yeah, it's got to help having a partner like STA that is doing so much electrification work nationwide to kind of fall back on. So
yeah, and they've got a really good person in charge there at STA that's kind of overseeing that electrification program, and I think that's the direction for sure they're headed. And I know that some of the other big players in the space have also started to really dive into that market, or at least test the waters there for sure.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you guys have a great operation there. I don't know if I can, second your call for the Chiefs to win another Super Bowl. I'm a Raiders fan, and that's painful enough to admit to,
Sure.
But especially this year. I guess, you're representing the AFC West if you guys make it, but I don't know. We have got history there, my friend. But that aside, all joking aside, thanks again for coming on and sharing more about the operations there in Kansas City, about yourself. And once again, congratulations on the Rising Star delineation from October and for winning that Green Bus Summit Green Fleet Award last summer. So Kudos to you and your staff.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the partnership with STN, and thanks for the time today. And hopefully there's something in here that can be a takeaway for somebody.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
Hey, special thanks to Ryan and Chris for joining us on today's episode. Great conversation, guys. Special thanks to our episode sponsor, TransFinder. We appreciate you guys. Visit stnonline.com for everything happening in the school transportation industry. Especially check out those special reports. Lots happening. Buyer's Guide 2023, January 2023. So much great information and content for you guys to soak up. Guys, don't forget, save the dates for the conferences, the ultimate experience in school transportation, training and professional development, networking, STN Expo Indianapolis, June 2nd through the 6th, STN Expo in Reno, July 14th through the 19th, and the Transporting Students with Disabilities and Special Needs Conference in November 15th through the 20th. Go to stnexpo.com, find all the information, all the latest updates. We'll be opening registration soon for STN Expo as well, so keep an eye on that if you're planning on attending to lock in those super early bird savings. Guys, remember, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. Stream, tell your friends, get it out there. We love you, nation. Talk to you next week.